Imagine a simple speeding case, and then the young man in front of Judge Caprio smiles, and the room goes strangely still. Because everyone knows, he isn't just any driver. He's the son of a famous Providence attorney. Paper whispers. A ceiling vent hums. The camera finds the judge's face, calm, watchful, measuring. At the defense table sits a 24-year-old in a tailored suit, posture rehearsed, confidence sharpened to a point. He lets the silence admire him, then delivers his line. Judge Caprio, I know the law better than most here. My father is Robert Hale, senior partner at Hale & Partners. I'm sure we can resolve this without needless formalities. Caprio's tone doesn't move. This is not we. This is a court, and the law is not impressed by surnames. A flicker in the gallery. Someone coughs. Someone smiles into a sleeve. The young man's grin tightens, but he has another move ready. The officer misfiled the citation, he says smoothly. I have proof. My dashcam clears me. The judge nods to the clerk. The monitor wakes. Headlights. Asphalt. Timestamps hiccup. A curve, a cut again, frames nipped like hedges. The film stutters forward in neat little bites, each more convenient than the last. No one cheers. The judge's eyes harden by degrees, not anger, attention. Mr. Hale, interesting. We'll set that video aside for now. He tilts his head. Did you edit it yourself? Yes, the young man says lightly. Only for ease of viewing. I'm not convinced, Caprio replies. And I suspect you aren't either. The defendant shifts. His cufflink taps wood. Somewhere near the back, a pen stops scratching. Caprio gestures for the report. He reads without hurry. The courtroom breathes together. The faint squeak of a leather shoe, the dry rasp of paper edges, the red light on the recorder steady as a heartbeat. The officer stands at parade rest. The gallery leans, but does not chime in. The judge's thumb pauses over a line. He closes the folder, then places his glasses on it like a seal. I don't care for conclusions made at a sprint, he says. But it appears this matter contains more than a ticket. The smile on the young man's face goes from confident to careful. The judge's gaze holds him there. No heat, only gravity. Outside, a siren fades down Washington Street. Inside, the quiet widens, an invitation and a warning at once. Counselor's son or not, Caprio adds. We will proceed by facts, not by favors. Take a moment. He opens the file again, slower than before, as if the truth might shift if rushed. The room waits with him, expectant, uneasy, while the simple case stops being simple. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. To understand why a lawyer's son stood before a municipal judge, you had to step outside the docket and into his hallway life. His name was Nick Hale, 24, Boston University law student, heir to a last name that opened doors and closed mouths. He grew up in a house where arguments were sport and apologies were signs of poor strategy. Tutors, mock trials, polished shoes, and a quiet ache that success never touched. His father, Robert Hale, built victories like skyscrapers. The son learned to live in their shadow. Judge Caprio skimmed the intake form, then met Nick's eyes. You say you know the law, he said, even-tempered. Tell me, what is it to you? A tool or a conscience? Nick didn't flinch. Both, sir. There's the trouble, Caprio replied. For me, it's only the second. No gavel, no theatrics, just a line placed like a marker on a map. A bailiff approached with a folded note from the clerk's office. Caprio read it, and the room felt the shift without knowing why. The officer who'd written the ticket, Sergeant Morales, had once been a client of Robert Hale's firm, a case that unraveled after what the memo diplomatically called aggressive procedural tactics. The sergeant lost badly. The ink of old resentment seemed to lift off the page. The judge's gaze moved from the paper to the people. Sergeant Morales, he said mildly, we'll hear from you soon. He set the note aside. Mr. Hale, you may step into the hallway for a moment. Nick looked surprised, then complied. The door closed with a soft latch. Caprio turned toward the woman in the second row, hands folded around a small purse as if it might fly away. Ma'am, he said gently, you're his mother? She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. He's not here only because of a citation, is he? Her voice was careful, carrying years of choosing words. He isn't his father. He's been trying to be what that name demands. Somewhere in there, I lost the boy who used to ask me what was right, not what would work. The judge let the silence hold her answer. No one shuffled. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to soften. Thank you, he said. You've been heard. He signaled to the bailiff. The door opened. Nick returned, face composed but less certain. Caprio folded his hands. Mr. Hale, I'll give you room to tell the truth. Not the version trimmed to fit a statute, not a narrative edited for advantage. If you lie again, there is no surname large enough to shield you. Nick drew a breath. The courtroom watched the calculation pass across his features and then leave him. I wasn't alone that night, he said. The words landed without echo, the kind of admission that changes what a case is about and what a man is willing to be. The silence that followed his confession lasted longer than any argument. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to dim, waiting for what would come next. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, eyes steady. Continue, Mr. Hale. Nick inhaled through his teeth. That night, I wasn't racing for fun. I was driving my friend home. He'd had too much to drink. He was falling over, couldn't walk. I didn't want him to drive himself, so I took the keys. I swear, I was just trying to do the right thing. Caprio tilted his head slightly. And you thought exceeding the limit by 20 miles per hour was part of that? Nick swallowed. I thought I was helping. I was afraid the police would think we were both drunk, so I edited the footage. I wanted people to see me as responsible, not reckless. The judge leaned forward, voice low but cutting through the air like glass. You didn't lie about the law. You lied to protect an image of yourself. You wanted to be the hero of your own defense. Nick opened his mouth to respond, but Caprio lifted a hand. Sit down, please. He turned to the bailiff. Bring in Sergeant Morales. The officer stepped forward, tall, mid-40s, face like weathered stone. He carried himself without swagger, but his presence tightened the room. Caprio nodded for him to speak. Your Honor, Morales began. When I pulled Mr. Hale over, it wasn't for speeding. It was for running a red light on Broad Street. He was going fast enough that I thought he'd lost control. When I reached the driver's window, the passenger was unconscious. And in the trunk, Morales hesitated. There were bottles. Several. Some still half full. A low murmur spread through the benches. Nick's head dropped. Caprio's tone didn't rise, but its gravity deepened. Is that true, Mr. Hale? Nick didn't lift his eyes. Yes, sir. Then you weren't saving anyone. You were gambling with 2 lives, and pretending it was noble. Nick clenched his fists. I didn't mean to hide anything. You just wanted to be seen as the better man, Caprio said quietly. Maybe to prove something to your father? That word landed hard. Father. The one shadow in every answer Nick had tried to control. He hesitated, then spoke so softly that only the front rows caught it. He doesn't care. He's in New York right now. He doesn't even know I'm here. Caprio waited. And yet you lied to sound like him. Why? Nick's throat tightened. Because he always wins. Even when he's wrong, he wins. And I thought, if I could argue like him, maybe he'd finally be proud. The courtroom went utterly still. Even the officer looked away, giving the boy back a shred of privacy. Caprio removed his glasses and set them down with a faint tap. When he spoke, his voice carried not judgment, but weight. You didn't just mislead this court, Mr. Hale. You betrayed the part of yourself that still knows what decency is. And that's the only part worth keeping. Nick looked up, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I thought law was about fighting to win. It's about knowing when not to fight, Caprio replied. About standing still when truth hurts most. The judge closed the file slowly, like a book whose ending he didn't want to rush. I'm adjourning this case until tomorrow morning. When you return, we won't talk about statutes or evidence. We'll talk about honor. Because somewhere along the line, your family taught you how to argue, but not how to be accountable. He rose, signaling the clerk. The gavel struck once, sharp, final. As the room emptied, Nick remained seated, staring at the silent monitor that had once been his weapon. Now it reflected only his own face, small, tired, and unedited. For the first time in his life, he couldn't tell whether he'd lost or just started learning what losing meant. The next morning, the courtroom was full before the clock struck 9. Every bench taken, people pressed against the walls, the air thick with something electric. Expectation mixed with curiosity. It wasn't the usual hum of routine cases. This was the kind of silence that happens before truth walks in. Nick Hale entered quietly, no longer wearing the confident grin that had followed him since childhood. His suit hung stiffly, his tie uneven. His mother sat in the front row, fingers clutched around her purse strap, the exhaustion of years etched beneath her eyes. Beside her, for the first time, sat Robert Hale, the man everyone in Providence recognized, the silver-haired attorney who had built a career on winning. But this morning, there was no victory in his face. He didn't nod to his son, didn't even blink in greeting. Just stared ahead, jaw locked, as though he too was on trial. Judge Caprio began without ceremony. "Before we proceed, I've received new evidence," he said, lifting a slim case file from the clerk. His tone carried no drama, but the words made the audience lean forward. A complete and unedited recording from the Broad Street surveillance system. Unlike what we viewed yesterday, this cannot be altered. The clerk dimmed the lights. The screen flickered to life. The grainy footage painted the truth with cruel precision. At first, it showed exactly what Nick had claimed. A car pulling to the curb, a slumped figure, his friend, barely conscious. Nick helping him into the passenger seat, his gestures careful, almost protective. It looked like decency. The audience exhaled. Then, seconds later, the flashing red and blue lights appeared behind him. Nick glanced in the mirror, panicked. The camera caught every motion, his hands grabbing 2 bottles from the back seat, shoving them into the trunk, closing it hard just before the officer reached the car window. Gasps scattered across the benches. Then came the whispering, sharp, uneasy, judgmental. The kind that spreads fast when people see guilt dressed up as good intention. Caprio's voice sliced through the noise, calm but heavy. "I see 2 people in that footage, Mr. Hale. One trying to do the right thing, and another terrified of what doing right might cost. You stood between courage and fear, and you chose fear." Nick's mouth opened, but no sound came. His gaze stayed glued to the frozen image on the screen, the frame that betrayed him better than any testimony. Then, suddenly, his father rose. His voice, practiced and commanding, filled the air like an echo from another courtroom. "Judge, my son has no obligation to answer that question without legal representation." Caprio turned his head, slow and deliberate. "He's not before me as a client, Mr. Hale," he said, his tone cutting clean through the elder man's authority. "He's here as a son. You may sit beside him if you wish, but you will not speak." A stunned hush swept through the room. Robert Hale hesitated, and used to being silenced. Finally, he sat, his posture collapsing slightly, the edge gone from his power. The stillness that followed was fragile. You could hear the creak of the wood as Nick's fingers tightened on the table. His breath quickened. Then, without warning, his voice cracked open like a wound. "You think I wanted to hide it?" he shouted, his face flushing with something that wasn't arrogance this time. It was hurt. "You think I care about a few bottles? I just didn't want him to know. If he found out I was helping a friend instead of sitting in his firm's office, he'd call me soft, a failure, just like he always does." The outburst rippled through the courtroom like a shockwave. Even the air seemed to stop moving. His mother began to cry silently. Robert Hale looked down at his hands, hands that had defended countless strangers, but never once reached out for his own son. Judge Caprio leaned forward, elbows on the bench, voice lowered but firm. "And now, Mr. Hale," he said, "you've finally spoken the truth. Not for the court, for yourself." Nick sat trembling, staring at the floor, his pulse still racing. Caprio let the silence sit long enough for the words to find their meaning. Finally, the judge straightened. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I'll deliver my ruling. But I'm not certain the verdict is meant for you alone." His gaze shifted toward Robert Hale. Perhaps the sentence belongs to the father as much as to the son. He didn't strike the gavel. He didn't have to. The silence itself became the verdict for the day, a silence so thick it carried something sacred. A father learning what defeat really meant, and a son discovering that truth, once spoken, can weigh more than guilt ever will. That morning, the courtroom felt different. The crowd had gathered again, but the usual buzz of curiosity was gone. In its place lingered something quieter, an awareness that they weren't just watching a trial anymore, but a reckoning between generations. The air felt personal, almost intimate, as though the law had stepped aside to make room for something older and heavier. Family. Nick sat at the same table, his eyes dull from a sleepless night. His mother hadn't spoken since the previous afternoon. Robert Hale arrived moments before the session began, coat perfectly pressed, but his shoulders carried the stiffness of a man who finally knew he couldn't control the outcome. Judge Caprio entered and took his seat. No introductions, no ceremony, just the steady rhythm of a man who had already seen too much pride fall apart before his bench. "Sergeant Morales," Caprio said, "before I proceed, is there anything you'd like to add to your testimony?" The officer rose, hands behind his back. His voice was steady, though not cold. "When I pulled Mr. Hale over that night, I didn't see a criminal," he began. "I saw my own son, same age, same look in the eyes. But when he smiled at me and said, 'It's fine, I'll handle this,' I realized he wasn't afraid of the law. He was afraid of losing control. That's why I finished the report. I needed him to face something he couldn't talk his way out of." Caprio nodded once, slowly. "Thank you, officer. That's precisely why we're here, to face what talk alone can't fix." The judge turned to the front row. "Mr. Hale, would you join your son?" For a moment, Robert Hale didn't move. His pride wrestled with the weight of the moment. Then he stood, walked forward, and faced the bench. The courtroom seemed to shrink around him. "Do you know," Caprio said quietly, "why your son stands here instead of sitting behind one of those desks in your firm, where people are paid to make excuses sound elegant?" Robert hesitated. His gaze darted to Nick, who avoided it. Finally, he spoke, his voice stripped of its courtroom polish. "I taught him to win," he said, "not to be honest." The words landed like a confession and a sentence at once. A murmur rippled through the room, but no one dared react too loudly. Nick's mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook silently. Caprio's tone softened, but didn't lose its edge. "He didn't need an advocate, Mr. Hale. He needed a father." The elder Hale's chin trembled slightly, barely noticeable, but real. His hands, once so sure in front of juries, now gripped the edge of the table like he needed it to stay upright. Nick looked at him, searching for something: anger, regret, anything human, and for the first time, he found it. Caprio exhaled, as if releasing something he'd been holding since the start. "This court is ready to rule." The room went still. "Mr. Hale," Caprio said, turning to Nick now, "you stand guilty, not of speeding, but of lying before this court. That lie carried more danger than your car did. Because dishonesty, when taught young, drives faster than any engine." He paused, then added, "Your fine is $5,000, not for reckless driving, but for deception under oath. Consider it the price of learning that truth, like law, carries a cost." The words spread through the gallery like ripples. Some looked surprised, others moved. No one protested. Caprio leaned forward slightly. "This isn't punishment. It's a reminder. Every generation writes its own definition of justice. Yours begins when you stop hiding behind your father's name." The gavel didn't strike yet. The judge let the silence breathe. Robert Hale turned to his son. For the first time, he didn't see a reflection of himself. He saw someone standing alone, fragile but unmasked. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for what I taught you, and for what I didn't." Nick's eyes glistened, but he didn't speak. He only nodded once, the smallest movement, but enough. Caprio finally lifted the gavel and spoke one last time before it fell. "Truth is rarely convenient, Mr. Hale, but it's always worth the cost." The sound of wood meeting would echoed through the chamber, sharp, final, reverent. And in that single strike, the courtroom understood justice hadn't punished a man. It had repaired one. When everyone had begun to rise, thinking it was over, Judge Caprio stayed seated. His hand rested on the file, but he didn't close it. The murmurs died one by one until only the echo of breathing filled the space. "You know," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the stillness, "I've seen hundreds of cases where people lied to escape punishment, but only a few where someone lied because they were desperate to be loved." The words seemed to hang in the air, landing not just on Nick, but on his father, too. Caprio removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose, then looked at the young man standing before him. "Mr. Hale," he continued, "you are guilty, but not lost. Do you know why? Because today, you did something rare. You admitted that fear still lives inside you. Most men spend their lives pretending they don't have any." Nick nodded slowly, his throat tight. "I wasn't afraid of the law," he said. "I was afraid of disappointing him." The judge's gaze softened. "And yet, Disappointment is sometimes what love needs to grow up. He paused. The law's purpose isn't to humiliate you. It's to make you honest, even when it hurts. Then Caprio reached for the file again, flipping to the final page. Your $5,000 fine will not go to the city, he said. It will be transferred to a fund that supports children of lawyers, those who grew up in houses full of rules, but short on affection. You'll volunteer there. You'll help them not become you. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Then the first sound was a faint clap, followed by another, until the entire gallery was applauding softly, not for mercy, but for meaning. Even the bailiff looked moved. Robert Hale, who had not spoken since his confession, stood and walked toward his son. No trace of arrogance now, no shield of profession. Just a man who had finally run out of defenses. He placed a hand on Nick's shoulder, voice breaking. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, "and ashamed of myself." Nick's eyes shimmered. He didn't speak, only gripped his father's hand, their first honest handshake in years. His mother watched through tears, a faint smile trembling across her lips. Judge Caprio looked at them, his expression warm but steady. "Law is not punishment," he said. "It's a mirror. And today, both of you finally looked into it." The gavel lifted once more. Case dismissed. The sound echoed, a clean, decisive stroke. As the courtroom emptied, Nick lingered near the exit. The morning light spilled across the marble floor, turning the dust in the air to gold. Reporters waited outside, microphones ready, but he didn't stop for them. He didn't pose. He didn't need to. For the first time in his life, the truth didn't feel like defeat. It felt like freedom. And as he stepped into the sunlight beside his parents, he understood what the judge had meant. Justice wasn't a verdict. It was a reflection. And he finally recognized the person staring back.